The town sat at the edge of a wide plain where the land was dry and the wind carried dust from one end to the other. People lived simple lives there. They cared for crops, watched their animals, and tried to keep peace with nature. Most days were quiet, but one thing broke that peace again and again. It was the wild donkey that everyone feared. The donkey lived near the hills on the far side of the plain. He was strong, fast, and full of energy that no one could control. He had dark fur, bright eyes, and a powerful build that made even the bravest rider take a step back. Some said he had been born wild. Others whispered he had lost his old home long ago and never trusted anyone again. Whatever the truth was, one thing was clear: no one could touch him. Whenever a farmer walked near the hills, the donkey appeared from behind rocks and made loud cries. He kicked the ground so hard dust flew like smoke. He chased away horses and frightened anyone who tried to go near him. In the town, children were warned not to wander far. Riders spoke of the donkey as if he were a storm that came without warning. One hot afternoon, a group of young men decided they would try to catch him. They carried ropes and moved across the plain on their horses. People watched them leave and shook their heads. The young men were confident, but the older folks knew the donkey was too clever. They had seen many attempts fail. The young men reached the hills and looked for the donkey. At first they saw nothing but dry rocks and thin bushes. Then a loud cry echoed. The donkey appeared on a ridge above them. He stood proudly, as if showing them he was the ruler of that place. When the men tried to climb toward him, the donkey leaped down and kicked up dust so thick they could not see. Their horses panicked. The men shouted. One rope was thrown but missed by a long distance. The donkey ran down the hill, leaving them in confusion. When they returned to town, they looked tired, dusty, and embarrassed. People laughed softly when they saw them. They said the donkey could not be caught by strength or speed. The young men agreed and said that no one in town would ever tame that wild creature. They said the donkey was too angry and too stubborn for any human hand. The news spread quickly. Even the smallest children knew the story. Some spoke of the donkey as if he were a legend. Some feared him. Some admired him. But no one understood him. One person listened quietly while others talked. He was an old cowboy named Tom. Tom lived on the edge of town in a small wooden house near a quiet barn. He had worked with animals all his life and had seen many creatures that others thought impossible to handle. His hands were steady, his voice calm, and his steps slow but sure. Many believed he carried the wisdom of years. Tom never rushed to speak. When he heard the stories about the donkey, he only nodded and kept listening. People asked if he had any plan to deal with the wild creature. Tom smiled and said the donkey would come near when he was ready. Some laughed at this. They said the donkey did not care for anyone. But Tom had his own way of seeing things. One morning, Tom walked toward the old barn to check the tools he kept there. The sky was clear and the air warm. As he stepped outside, he noticed movement near the open field. The wild donkey had come closer to town. His strong legs carried him with confident steps. His ears stood high and alert. His eyes were sharp as he looked around. People hurried into their homes. They watched from windows and whispered nervously. They expected the donkey to charge at anyone who came near. They expected dust and noise. They expected trouble. Tom did not hide. He stepped out of the barn and stood still. The donkey stopped and stared at him. There was tension in the air. Some thought Tom would turn back, but he did not. He had dealt with frightened horses, stubborn mules, and restless cattle. He knew when an animal needed calm, not fear. The donkey gave a loud cry. It echoed across the field. Tom's heart beat steadily. His face showed no fear. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides. He took one slow step forward and waited. The donkey kicked the ground but did not move closer. His eyes stayed fixed on the old cowboy. Tom watched him closely. He did not speak at first. He let the donkey see that he carried nothing in his hands. No rope, no stick, no tool to force him. People watching from their homes held their breath. They had never seen anyone stand so close without fear. Tom took another slow step, then another. Dust moved under the donkey's hooves. His muscles tightened as if he was ready to jump away. But he did not attack. The old cowboy stopped a few feet away. He lowered his head slightly, as if showing respect. He spoke in a soft voice. The words were simple and gentle. He told the donkey he was not there to harm him. He told him he understood his fear. He told him he would not force him. The donkey tilted his head. His ears moved, listening to the tone rather than the words. He made a quiet sound deep in his throat. He stayed still. For the first time in all the years the town had known him, the donkey did not chase anyone away. He did not cry out. He did not kick the ground. He simply watched the old cowboy who stood near him without fear. Tom slowly sat on a low wooden crate near the barn entrance. The donkey remained alert but did not run away. Tom stayed still, letting the donkey decide what to do next. The wind blew gently across the plain. Small pieces of grass rolled along the dirt. The scene felt calm in a way no one had ever seen before. People inside their homes whispered that something special was happening. They said the donkey had never behaved this way. They said the old cowboy must have a gift. Tom stayed with the donkey until the sun dropped lower in the sky. He did not touch him. He did not reach for him. He simply shared the same quiet space with him. When the donkey finally walked back toward the hills, Tom watched him go. He smiled softly. He felt something change that day. The donkey had shown trust, even if only for a few minutes. And from that moment the people of the town began to believe the old cowboy might be the first person the wild donkey would accept. The next morning the town woke early. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of red and gold. People stepped outside their homes to begin their daily work. But even before they reached their fields or shops, they looked toward the hills. They wondered if the wild donkey would return. Some hoped he would stay far away. Others hoped he would come back to see the old cowboy again. Tom woke before sunrise. He stepped outside and stretched his arms. His small house stood silent, but the land around him was full of life. Birds called from nearby bushes. The wind carried a cool touch across the plain. Tom looked toward the barn and felt a sense of calm. He knew the donkey had not come close by accident the day before. He believed the animal had been searching for something. Tom walked to the barn and opened the door. Inside he kept tools, a small bench, and some feed for animals. He picked up a few pieces of bread from a cloth bag and placed them into his pocket. Then he walked to the same place where he met the donkey the day before. He sat on the low wooden crate and waited. Time passed slowly. Tom did not move much. He watched the field, listened to the wind, and kept his breathing steady. He believed patience was the only way to gain trust. Soon the sun rose higher. Shadows shortened. People began to think the donkey would not come. But then a sound echoed from the hills. A sharp cry cut through the air. Heads turned. Windows opened. Children climbed onto fences to see. The donkey appeared. He walked down the slope at a steady pace. His steps were firm and confident, but something was different. His ears were not pinned back. His tail did not swing with irritation. He looked around but did not show the wild anger he once carried. He stopped some distance from the barn, watching Tom as if studying his calm posture. Tom smiled softly. He did not stand. He did not wave. He only spoke in a gentle voice. He told the donkey he was welcome. He said the donkey could leave whenever he wished. Tom knew the donkey understood tone more than words. The donkey took a few steps forward. Dust rose lightly around his hooves. Tom reached into his pocket and placed a piece of bread on the ground beside him. Then he moved his hand away. The bread sat untouched for a moment. The donkey sniffed the air. His nose twitched. He looked at the bread, then at Tom. He hesitated. For a long moment he did not move. Finally he lowered his head and walked slowly toward it. His steps were small and careful. When he reached the bread he paused again, as if deciding whether to trust what was in front of him. Then he took it gently in his mouth and stepped back. People watching from a distance gasped. It was the first time they had seen the donkey eat anything placed by a human. It was a sign of trust that no one expected to witness. Tom sat silently, letting the donkey have his space. After a while he placed another small piece of bread on the ground, closer to himself than the first. The donkey watched him. His ears twitched. He stood still for a moment before slowly moving forward to take the second piece. This time he did not step back as far after eating. Tom spoke softly again. He praised the donkey in a calm voice. The donkey lowered his head a little and relaxed his shoulders. The tension in the air eased. After some minutes the donkey moved even closer. He stood just a few steps away. Tom lifted his hand slightly, not enough to touch, only enough to show he meant no harm. The donkey did not run. He only watched the hand with sharp attention. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of dry grass. Tom moved his hand a little more. Still no fear from the donkey. Then Tom slowly lowered his hand again. He knew the donkey was not ready for touch, but he also knew this closeness was a great step forward. People in the town began to talk. They said Tom must have some special natural skill. They said the donkey was changing. They said the hills were no longer filled with wild anger but with a new calm. As the days passed, Tom continued his routine. Every morning he sat near the barn. Every morning the donkey appeared. At first the meetings were short. The donkey would come, watch, eat the bread, and leave. But each day he stayed a little longer. Tom named him Clay. He chose the name because he believed the donkey, like clay in a potter's hands, was slowly taking a new shape. Clay did not know the meaning of the name, but he responded to the sound of it. When Tom spoke the name, the donkey lifted his head and looked toward him. Children became curious. Some asked Tom if they could come close to see Clay. Tom always said not yet. He told them Clay was learning trust and too many new faces would frighten him. The children listened. They watched from a safe distance and whispered to each other about how the old cowboy was doing the impossible. One afternoon Clay came earlier than usual. The sun was still rising, and the land was covered in pale light. Clay walked with calm steps toward the barn. Tom greeted him softly and offered a small piece of bread. Clay ate it without hesitation. This time Tom tried something new. He lifted his hand and moved it slowly toward Clay's neck. Clay watched the hand but did not step away. Tom stopped just before touching him. He waited. Clay gave a quiet sound and leaned forward slightly. Tom touched his neck gently. It was only for a brief second, but it was enough. Clay did not run. Clay did not kick. Clay did not cry out. He only moved his head a little as if unsure how to react. Tom withdrew his hand and smiled. People saw it from far away and could hardly believe it. They said it was a sign that Clay had chosen Tom. They said the wild donkey had finally found someone he trusted. Later that day, Clay followed Tom around the barn for a few minutes before walking back toward the hills. Tom watched him go and felt a warm feeling in his chest. He knew Clay was not just curious anymore. Clay had started to feel safe near him. As the sun set behind the distant hills, Tom sat quietly and thought about how far they had come. Clay was no longer the same wild creature who chased away anyone who approached. He was still strong and cautious, but he was learning that not all humans brought danger. The bond had begun to form. It was slow, gentle, and built on trust, and the town waited to see how far this unlikely friendship would grow. Clay returned to the hills every night, but each morning he came back to the barn a little earlier than before. His steps carried less tension. His ears no longer stood stiff in alarm. The wild donkey who once ran from every sound now looked around calmly as he approached the old cowboy. Tom watched this change with quiet pride. He never rushed Clay, never forced him, and never expected too much at once. He believed in slow and honest progress. One morning the sky was cool and pale. A gentle breeze moved across the plain. Tom was already seated near the barn when Clay appeared. Clay walked toward him with steady steps, his dark fur shining in the early light. Tom lifted his hand in greeting and spoke the donkey's name in a warm tone. Clay answered with a soft sound and came close enough that Tom could touch his neck again. Tom brushed Clay with gentle strokes. The donkey lowered his head and relaxed. His muscles softened under Tom's hand. This simple moment showed how far they had come. Clay had once refused to let anyone near him. Now he was standing beside Tom without fear. Tom decided it was time to teach Clay simple commands, not because he wanted to control him, but because he wanted Clay to understand signals that could keep him safe around people. Tom stepped back a little and raised his hand. Clay watched him closely. Tom lowered his hand and took a few steps forward. Clay followed him without being asked. This was surprising even to Tom. It showed Clay trusted him deeply. A few townspeople gathered nearby to watch. They kept a respectful distance. They saw Clay walk beside Tom as if he were a gentle farm animal, not the wild and aggressive creature they had feared for years. Tom turned to them and gave a small smile, but Clay stayed focused on him. Tom led Clay around the barn in a slow circle. Each time he stopped, Clay stopped. Each time he turned, Clay followed. It was not perfect, but it showed promise. Clay lifted his head proudly, as if he understood he was doing something good. After a while, Tom gave Clay a rest. He offered him a few small pieces of bread, and Clay accepted them with calm confidence. Tom rubbed the donkey's forehead, and Clay leaned gently into the touch. People watching could hardly believe that the same animal who used to chase riders now acted like a loyal companion. A young farmer named Ben approached Tom carefully. Ben had always been curious about animals, and he had a kind heart. He asked Tom if he could come closer. Tom looked at Clay and studied the donkey's reaction. Clay's ears lifted but did not point backward in alarm. Tom nodded to Ben and motioned for him to move slowly. Ben stepped forward with calm steps. Clay watched him but did not move away. Tom whispered softly to Clay, reassuring him. Ben reached out and held his hand open so Clay could smell him. Clay sniffed Ben's hand and made a soft sound. Ben smiled, amazed that the wild donkey allowed him so close. This small moment spread quickly through the town. People started to believe Clay was truly changing. They spoke about Tom's patience and the donkey's new gentle behavior. They said the hills no longer felt dangerous because the wild donkey had found a friend. However, Clay's journey was not completely smooth. One afternoon, as Tom was leading Clay near the field, a loud noise came from behind the barn. A metal sheet had fallen to the ground with a sharp crash. Clay jumped back in fear. His ears shot straight up. His breath quickened. Tom did not grab him or shout. He stepped forward and stood calmly. He spoke in a gentle voice. Clay watched him with wide eyes, confused by the sudden noise but comforted by Tom's calm presence. Tom waited until Clay stepped toward him again. He touched Clay's neck and stroked him until the donkey's breathing slowed. Clay remembered the old fear for a moment, but Tom helped him move past it. This moment showed that the wildness was still inside Clay, but it also showed how much he trusted Tom. Before, Clay would have run far into the hills. Now he chose to stay. Day after day, Clay became more confident. Tom continued to train him in simple ways. He taught Clay to stop when he raised his hand. He taught him to move forward with a small gesture. Clay learned quickly. He seemed to enjoy the clear communication. He even started waiting by the barn before Tom arrived, as if eager to begin each day's work. People started bringing small gifts for Clay. Some brought fresh grass. Some brought water. Children drew pictures of the donkey and gave them to Tom. Tom accepted these gifts with a warm smile but reminded everyone that Clay was still learning. He said they must move slowly and with respect. Clay also started helping around the barn. Tom tied light bundles of straw with a soft rope and placed them on Clay's back. Clay carried them with ease. Tom praised him with kind words, and Clay lifted his head proudly. The donkey had strong legs and a strong back, With Tom's guidance, he learned to use his strength in gentle ways. One day, Tom decided to test how far Clay's trust had grown. He placed a soft cloth over Clay's back and gently pulled it around his belly. Clay shifted his weight but did not resist. Tom spoke softly and moved slowly. He tied the cloth securely, then stepped back. Clay stood still. This was the first step toward allowing a simple harness or small saddle in the future, but Tom did not rush it. He removed the cloth again and praised Clay. That afternoon, Clay followed Tom all the way to the edge of the town. People waved and smiled as they passed. Clay held his head high, proud and calm. Tom walked at his side like a quiet guide. Children pointed at Clay and whispered that he looked like a guardian of the town as the sun lowered in the sky. Tom walked back toward the barn. Clay walked beside him without needing any command. When they reached the barn, Clay stopped and looked at Tom with soft eyes. Tom placed his hand on Clay's forehead and whispered his gratitude. Clay had changed so much, and Tom felt honored to be part of that journey. Clay returned to the hills that evening. He walked slowly, stopping once to look back at the barn. His dark shape moved across the field, steady and calm. When he reached the ridge, he stopped again. The wind carried the scent of the barn and the memory of Tom's gentle voice. Clay lifted his head, stared toward the town for a moment, then disappeared behind the hill. The bond between Clay and Tom had grown stronger, deeper, and more trusting than anyone had ever expected, and everyone waited to see what new changes the next days would bring. Days passed like gentle waves across the plain. The bond between Tom and Clay grew stronger with each sunrise. Clay no longer acted like the wild creature the town once feared. He walked with calm steps, listened to Tom's voice with trust, and stayed near the barn for longer periods before returning to the hills at night. Many people were amazed to see such a change in an animal that had once caused so much fear. One cool morning, Tom noticed Clay waiting near the barn even before he stepped outside. Clay stood quietly, his ears relaxed, his tail moving slowly in the breeze. Tom approached him with a warm smile and rubbed his neck gently. Clay leaned into the touch, showing a level of comfort he had never shown before. Tom decided it was time to teach Clay something new. He wanted Clay to learn how to walk through town without fear, stay calm around different sounds, and understand that people meant no harm. Tom believed Clay was ready for this new challenge. Tom placed a soft rope loosely around Clay's neck. It was not tied tightly and would not control Clay. It was only a guide, a sign of direction. Clay sniffed the rope and gave a soft sound. Tom spoke in a calm voice and took a step forward. Clay followed. They walked slowly toward the center of town. People watched from their doors and windows. Some waved, some whispered in surprise. Many children ran to their parents, pointing excitedly at Clay walking beside the old cowboy like a gentle partner. Tom walked at a steady pace, keeping his posture calm. Clay stayed close, his eyes watching the road ahead. When a cart rolled by and the wheels made noise, Clay flicked his ears but did not panic. When a dog barked in the distance, Clay paused for a moment but did not turn to run. Tom praised him with gentle words, letting him know he was doing well. The town felt different with Clay walking through it. People who once feared the wild donkey now felt comfort at the sight of him. They saw not a danger but a strong and loyal animal guided by patience and kindness. Tom led Clay to a water trough near the main road. Clay bent his neck and drank calmly while a few children watched. One boy asked Tom if he could touch Clay. Tom looked at Clay and waited. Clay raised his head and looked at the boy. His ears did not point back. He did not step away. Tom nodded gently to the boy. The boy moved slowly and placed his hand on Clay's shoulder. Clay blinked and stood still. The boy laughed softly and thanked Tom. Other children wanted to touch Clay too, but Tom asked them to wait for another day. He wanted Clay to stay comfortable and not feel crowded as they walked back toward the barn. Tom felt proud of Clay. He had shown courage and calmness that no one expected. Clay had changed not only himself but also the way the town saw him that afternoon. Tom decided to help Clay learn to carry light weight more confidently. Clay was strong enough, but Tom wanted him to feel safe while doing it. He placed a soft blanket over Clay's back again. Clay accepted it without worry. Tom then tied 2 small sacks of grass on each side. They were light and easy to carry. Clay walked with the sacks on his back, moving smoothly and confidently. Tom guided him around the barn, then through the field, and Clay adjusted easily. He did not try to shake the sacks off. He did not act tense. Tom knew Clay was growing into a well-trained and calm animal. While they were walking, Tom noticed movement on the edge of the plain. 2 riders from a nearby ranch were making their way toward the town. They rode strong horses and carried ropes on their saddles. Tom recognized them. They were ranch hands known for capturing wild animals for their ranch. The riders approached Tom with curious expressions. One of them nodded toward Clay and said he had heard stories about a wild donkey being tamed by an old cowboy. Tom replied politely that he was only building trust with the animal, nothing more. The riders looked at Clay with interest. One asked if Clay would make a good working animal. Tom answered calmly that Clay was learning, but he needed more time before anyone tried to use him for hard work. Clay was not ready for strangers. One rider stepped closer to Clay, maybe too close. Clay shifted slightly, showing discomfort. Tom placed a hand on Clay's neck and spoke softly to reassure him. Clay relaxed again, but the riders noticed his reaction. They said they would return later to see Clay again. Tom nodded, but inside he felt a small worry. He did not know what the riders wanted. He hoped they would not cause trouble. After the riders left, Tom continued training Clay. They walked around the field until the sun began to lower. Clay moved confidently with the sacks on his back, showing progress with each step. When Tom removed the sacks and blanket, Clay gave a soft sound as if thanking him for the attention that evening. Clay stayed longer than usual before returning to the hills. He stood beside Tom near the barn, watching the sky change from orange to pink. The wind moved gently, brushing across their faces. Tom felt a deep bond with Clay, one built on trust, patience, and countless shared moments. When Clay finally walked back toward the hills, Tom watched him with a thoughtful expression. He wondered what the riders wanted and whether their return would bring trouble. He trusted Clay's strength, but he also knew some people chased opportunity without considering the animal's well-being. The next morning, Clay returned even earlier. Tom smiled and greeted him warmly. Clay's ears flicked as if he sensed something different in the air. The day felt quiet, almost too quiet. Tom brushed Clay and began another training session. Clay followed commands easily. He walked, stopped, and turned just as Tom wanted. When Tom placed the blanket on his back, Clay stood patiently. But as they walked near the edge of the field, Tom saw dust rising in the distance. The riders from the previous day were returning. This time they moved with purpose. Tom placed his hand gently on Clay's neck. Clay watched the riders approach with alert eyes. He did not panic, but he sensed the tension in the air. Tom prepared himself. He did not know what the riders intended, but he was ready to protect the donkey who had become more than just an animal. Clay was a friend, and Tom would not let anyone break the trust they had built. As the riders came closer, the entire town began to watch. Something was about to happen. The next morning arrived with a bright sky and soft sunlight resting over the ranch. The air felt calm, almost like the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. The wild donkey, now called Storm, stood near the fence with his head high. His coat looked cleaner, his eyes more gentle, and his breathing steady. The old cowboy, named Ray, woke up early and stepped outside with a sense of calm pride warming his chest. Ray walked toward Storm with a slow and steady step. He carried a small bucket of water and a handful of hay. Storm watched him closely, then moved closer in a careful way, not rushing, not panicking. It was as if Storm already knew Ray would never harm him. Ray smiled and held out the hay. Storm took it from his hand without fear. Seeing this simple act, Ray felt something powerful inside him. He had tamed many animals in his long life, but Storm was different. Storm had come to him wild, wounded, angry, and afraid. Now he stood with trust, ready for the future. After a few minutes, Ray began to brush Storm's back with a soft brush. Storm leaned into the touch. For the first time, he fully accepted the old cowboy. It was a soft moment that would stay in Ray's memory forever. Later that morning, two neighbors arrived at the ranch. One was Tom, a man who always had doubts about things. The other was Mira, a kind woman who loved animals. Both of them had come with worry. Thinking the wild donkey might still be dangerous, Tom stepped out of his wagon and crossed his arms. "Are you sure this is safe?" Ray nodded with calm confidence. He motioned them closer but told them to move slowly. Storm lifted his head, sensed the new people, and took a small step back. Ray whispered softly to him, his voice warm and steady. Storm relaxed again. Mira watched with surprise. She had seen Storm chase people away before, but now the donkey stood calm beside Ray. Mira slowly raised her hand and let Storm sniff her fingers. Storm did not bite or turn away. He simply smelled her hand and lowered his head. "This is amazing," Mira said with awe in her voice. Tom kept watching, still unsure. Ray then turned to Tom and said, "Put your hand out. Storm won't harm you." Tom hesitated but stepped forward. His hand trembled a bit as he raised it. Storm looked at him but did not move in a harsh way. After a slow moment, Storm touched Tom's hand with his nose. Tom blinked in disbelief. He looked at Ray with wide eyes. "You did it, Ray. Nobody could touch him before." Ray shook his head. "Storm did it. He just needed someone to understand him." The small group stood in silence for a moment. The air held a feeling of peace. Storm had changed, and they all knew it. By noon, a few more locals arrived. Word had traveled fast. People were curious. Many had heard of the wild donkey that kicked and charged at everyone who came close. Now they wanted to see for themselves if the stories of change were true. A young boy named Ron stepped forward. He had always admired strong animals and dreamed of being a cowboy like Ray. Ron looked up at Ray with hopeful eyes and asked if he could pet Storm. Ray smiled and nodded, but he guided Ron carefully. Storm saw the young boy and slowly lowered his head. Ron placed his hand on Storm's nose. A bright smile spread across his face. Ray watched this and felt his heart warm. Storm was no longer an angry creature. He had become gentle, even caring. The wildness in him had not disappeared, but it had softened into something strong and useful. After everyone had a chance to see Storm, Ray prepared for the next big step. He wanted to see if Storm was ready to wear a simple rope halter. This was a big test. If Storm accepted it, it would show that he trusted Ray enough to be guided. Ray approached Storm with the rope in hand. The crowd quieted. Even the wind seemed to pause. Storm watched Ray and stayed still. Ray touched Storm's cheek, then slowly placed the rope around his head. Storm lifted his head once, but he did not pull away. The rope settled in place. Ray tied it gently and stepped back. The ranch fell silent for one long moment. Storm stood calmly. Ray took a deep breath. He whispered, "Good boy." Applause broke out from the people around them. They clapped and cheered in excitement. Tom laughed and shook his head. Mira wiped a small tear from her eye. Ron jumped up and down with joy. Ray raised his hands and smiled warmly at the crowd. Storm had done something everyone thought was impossible. He had let a human guide him without fear. Ray then took a soft step backward and gave a light pull on the rope. Storm followed. 1 step, 2 steps, then 3. He followed Ray across the ranch yard with calm steps and steady eyes. The crowd watched with complete amazement. Ray stopped walking and patted Storm's neck. The donkey leaned into the touch. It was clear the bond between them was strong and real. The wild animal who once kicked dust into the air and scared everyone away now walked beside Ray like a loyal partner. After the crowd left, Ray stood with Storm under the warm sun. He thought about everything that had happened. He remembered the first day Storm arrived, angry and confused. He remembered the long quiet nights, the challenges, and the careful steps. He remembered the fear in Storm's eyes and how that fear slowly changed into trust. Ray placed his hand gently on Storm's neck. "You're not wild anymore. You're just strong in your own way." Storm nudged Ray's shoulder in a gentle way, like he understood every word. As the day moved toward evening, Ray decided it was time for their final test together. He wanted to see if Storm could walk outside the ranch gate without panicking. He opened the gate and stepped out onto the soft dirt road. Storm looked at the open space but did not rush or resist. He followed Ray calmly. They walked down the road with the setting sun behind them. Birds flew overhead. A quiet wind moved across the grass. Storm kept his ears forward, alert but calm. Ray walked with a relaxed step, knowing that every moment here showed how far they had come. After a short walk, Ray turned back toward the ranch. Storm followed with steady steps. When they returned through the gate, Ray gave Storm a long, gentle stroke. "You did well." That night, Storm slept peacefully in a warm corner of the ranch. There was no sound of kicking, no sound of fear, no restless movement. He slept like an animal that finally felt safe. Ray sat on his porch and watched the stars. His heart felt full. He knew Storm's life was different now. He knew Storm would never go back to the angry creature he once was. The old cowboy had not changed a donkey by force. He had changed him with patience, kindness, and steady courage. Storm had found a home. Ray had found a partner. And the ranch, once filled with worry, now held a story that everyone would remember for years to come. A story of a wild donkey that nobody could touch until an old cowboy showed him a different world. A world of trust. A world of peace. A world where even the wildest heart could learn to rest.